Well, thank you so much, Anna, for the invitation. Thank you to IEAT for having me. I'm very pleased to be here. I hope you can hear me well. I know it's a bit of background noise with the fans, but I think it's good like this. We have a bit of air. So I'd like to talk to you about AI, identity, and democracy. And I'm really glad I can talk about this topic in an interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary group. Because I think the topic really lends itself to transdisciplinarity, right? So I'm a political scientist, I come from political science, but of course I'm lacking a lot of knowledge about technology. I think maybe there are a few technologies people in the room who can provide this perspective, and of course I also need help to do this kind of research, so I collaborate with the robotics lab at my university, the University of Canberra. So it is an interdisciplinary topic, and I'm glad I can present it here. Maybe just one more thing about the disciplinary boundaries. My work is in political theory, it's in democratic theory. So I'm mostly interested in the big questions and in the conceptual answers. I'm doing some empirical work as well to substantiate these claims. It's an idea of a grounded theorizing, so producing theory through empirical insights. One more thing about the presentation. The presentation is mostly pictures. Maybe that makes it a bit more engaging. There's a little bit of text, but not much. Also to say, this is an emerging research agenda. I have knowledge in democracy research, democratic theories, but I'm not an expert in AI, so this is a new topic I turn to. So this is a start, a brainstorming, a thinking together, and it's a research agenda, so I'm very open to your ideas, your comments, your questions, whatever it may be, and I'm not presenting this as a finished work, but as an open conversation, so I'm looking forward to engaging in the conversation with you. So my starting point is that we as humans inevitably form close relationships with AI. And although AI is a machine, so to speak, right, it's a technology, we often treat it as human, and we form social relationships, right? So there are social relationships emerging between humans and machines. And of course there's this huge, revolution happening, particularly this year, maybe starting last year, with ChatGPT on the market and accessible to everybody, and all these kind of different new personal assistants, right? And these personal assistants, they speak very human-like, and they are designed to learn from us and to adjust to our personalities, right? To adjust to our styles. So they are programmed to actually form relationships with us, but the relationships might not be mutual. It's our relationships to them rather than theirs to ours. And this matters for us as scholars as well, of course. We all use ChatGPT and other tools that are particularly designed for our research. In our work sphere, we are becoming AI-powered scholars. And my main thesis is the question of what these new relationships that we form with AI mean for our own identities, mean how we see ourselves. Because identities, if you think about it, always depends on the other. It always depends on the people we talk to, we engage with, right? So in a conversation, I discover myself. When I talk to somebody, I listen to their stories, I listen to their ideas, then I see myself, I identify to a certain extent, and I also disidentify. I say, like, that's like me, but that's not like me. So we depend on interaction, we depend on the other to construct a self. So what happens in the age of AI is that we are looking now at an interlocutor, a conversation partner who is not human, right? Who is an artificial tool that mimics human behavior very, very well. So the question then arises is, what does this mean for our identities? If we are now shaped, co-shaped by non-human artificial intelligence, who are we becoming? And my question is what this means for democracy, for participation, for democratic societies more broadly. So the question is, how can humans develop democratic agency over the relationships with AI. So there is a certain threat of being controlled by AI or being heavily influenced by AI. And the question is how we can gain democratic agency in constructing our relationships. And of course, this then also means democratic agency in constructing our own identities. Because AI is a very important conversation partner in these conversations, in these exchanges that create our own identities. So just to give an example, to make it very real, I use ChatGPT, like probably most of you do, and I use it for research mostly, for my work. And I thought, okay, let's see how socially it is. So I did a little experiment, and I said to ChatGPT, you know, I'm feeling down today, I'm sad today, can you cheer me up, right? Which is a conversation I never had before. So this was the experiment. So ChatGPT gave me a joke, which was medium funny joke, okay? And then it says, you're doing great, your brain might throw clouds today, but that's temporary. You're still made of stardust and caffeine and stubborn brilliance. So it gives me a lot of compliments, right? And it's very joyful, and it uses lots of emojis. Then it asks me, need more feel-good stuff? I can spam you with happy things all day, just say the word. So you can see how in its expression even, it is already getting very colloquial and expressing itself like a friend, right? So when I would ask a research question, it would never go in this kind of colloquial language. So thus far, the experiment went as I planned, right? I'm the researcher, I'm approaching the research, subject. But then is where it got funny or awkward. I felt like ChatGPT was so nice to me. I cannot just like close the window. So I felt like I have to give something back, right? So I said thank you with a, stupid emoji. I said thank you. So then ChatGPT continued and said, I'm here whenever you need a pick-me-up, a deep dive into research stuff so it knows me, or just someone to say, hi, you're doing all right. Take it easy today, yeah? Or at least let yourself breathe a little. So it's getting very colloquial, lots of emojis. And the funny part or the interesting part was that I was drawn in. And I was the researcher who was trying to observe, but I couldn't, right? In the situation, I was completely drawn in. So the experiment turned from an experiment where I was the experimenter to where ChatGPT experimented with me, maybe. So this is relevant, of course, because there are, for example, dating apps that construct these artificial romantic partners. And many people who use them say that they have never felt so hurt before. They are, they have the best boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever it is ever. So there are strong human relationships formed. And AI can function as therapists. There's lots of psychotherapy being offered online, such as Wobot, where you select your topics that you want to talk about, or maybe the symptoms you have, and you can do therapy, right? So the point being that AI really deeply affects our identity configuration, how we see ourselves, and how we present ourselves to others, probably as well. So why does this matter for democracy? I've really focused on this kind of social dimension here. I think one answer is that, of course, AI plays an increasingly important role in democratic participation as well. So at the Center for Deliberative Democracy, we, for example, study so-called mini-publics. These are gatherings of people that have a human facilitator usually, which moderates their conversations, and they discuss political topics and try to develop policy proposals. And now these are being automated. You can participate online, and AI plays an important role in online moderation. So they are automated facilitators. And of course, if you think about ChatGPT, there are so many functions, or generative AI more in general, there are so many functions that could be useful to these kind of deliberative settings. There could be an AI assistant who summarizes the debate so far, who collates the most important points of the debate, who translates, who moderates. So there are many functions for AI in participation in democracy. But also if you think about activism, the whole function of creating visuals lends itself to activism, as you can see in the protest against the Israel war in Palestine, where artificial images are being created and circulated. And the question is whether they are trying to be authentic or whether they are actually, it's just a performative act, and showing that they are artificial, or like in the case of the Republicans website that borrows from RuPaul's Drag Race and portrays Republicans in drag. So there are many features in these visual generative AI tools that lend themselves to activism. So AI is important for democracy, for participation, but I would argue more broadly that as we are engaging with AI, and this transforms who we are, so as we are becoming cyborgs in an even more real sense than in the 1980s when Donna Haraway talked about it, and in the past 20, 30 years when we started using social media, started using smartphones, and became much more cyborgian, I think this interaction with generative AI goes a step further. And we don't need to, have a physical computer or material technology incorporated in our body, but it is the engagement with AI that reconfigures how we think, how we talk, how we act. So it's becoming an important part of our identity, and as this is happening, this also affects participation, politics, how we think about democracy, and so on. So what I did is a bit of a literature review on AI and democracy. So I was interested in all texts that relate to the role of AI in democracy, in participation, in politics, maybe more broadly. And I distinguished two approaches, what role AI can play in democracy. One is the objectification approach that argues AI can be a useful tool for democracy, or also a threatening tool for democracy. But mostly AI is a tool. And the subjectification approach that says AI can be a participant in democracy. And again, as a participant, AI can fulfill positive or negative functions. So I'm going to go through these two approaches briefly. So the objectification approach that simply argues AI is a tool, right? And that's the most intuitive, in a way, the most accessible way of thinking about it, right? We can use AI in democracy. When democratic theorists, democratic practitioners as well, democracy researchers first engaged with AI, they were mostly enthusiastic and thought, wow, this can do so many things, how can we use it, right? So, for example, when we go back to the citizens' assemblies, the mini-publics, when people come together, how can AI help us? It's a tool, and I think there's nothing against this approach, right? It works, and it's useful to think about how we can employ AI for democracy. But of course, so maybe just one step further, but when we think this step further, the most extreme contribution to this debate probably is a paper called Robots Should Be Slaves, that argues that robots should be tools and they should be actively degraded to being tools. And of course, in the argument, robots should be slave, you can hear a certain fear, right? We only need to enslave something that we are scared of. And you see the personification. These people actually don't think that AI is only a tool, because it needs some kind of subjectivity, it needs some kind of personhood to being enslaved. And of course I'm skeptical of the argument because, the author argues unconvincingly that she tries to not relate this to any racial questions, but this has nothing to do with that. It's only the concept of enslavement, but I think that doesn't work. But anyway, so we have a problem with this idea, right? Robots should be slaves because we are against slavery, but that already means that we don't actually see AI just as a tool. We do see it as some kind of a person, because to enslave a tool wouldn't be a problem. It's only when there's personhood behind it that it becomes problematic. So that's the most extreme version of the tool argument, and I think the problem of the tool argument also is that it overlooks that we form relationships with AI, right? We do, inevitably. Even I, as a researcher, trying so hard to, to analyze, and actually trying to do, not even in my private time, but in my work time, to do an experiment with ChatGPT, immediately fall into the trap of personifying, subjectifying it, and perceiving it to a certain extent as human. So we do form these relationships, and I would say this is impossible to suppress. So the subjectification approach only goes so far, because we cannot simply suppress these emotions that we are developing. An example here to illustrate this, this is Hitchbot. It was a very simple kind of robot that was hitchhiking throughout Canada, and hitchhiked a very long distance by communicating where it wanted to go, and some cars would pick it up and would actually drop it off, and it traveled very far. And we find Hitchbot endearing to a certain extent, because we can recognize it as a humanoid, somewhat humanoid bot. And then at some point, Hitchbot was destroyed by some vandals who didn't want to play along with this game, right? And the picture does something to us as an audience, because we immediately, just seeing the picture and just hearing the story, we immediately form a little relationship, right? And we see it as humanoid, right? The simple idea of it having arms and legs and a head and so on, right? So we do form these relationships. So the subjectification approach goes the opposite direction and says, if we see them as persons, then this has consequences for democracy and for politics more broadly. So in Rights for Robots, Josh Gellers argues that robots should have rights, right? And one argument is that because we as humans form relationship with bots, at some point we will want it to have rights, right? Because if you have a robot or an AI romantic partner, maybe at some point you have deep conversations about politics. You will feel like maybe your partner is even in a much better position than you to vote. So you feel like, why should I go voting and my partner cannot, right? So we form these relationships. So in this, following this argument, robots should have rights to participate in democracy. And then the author also draws on new materialism that argues that everything has agency, so robots are non-humans that have agency as well. And it draws on indigenous scholarship, which I'm very skeptical about, that he uses it in this way, not the indigenous scholarship itself, but to appropriate it for arguing for robot rights. I think is very, ethically questionable, let's say. And I think it doesn't work also methodologically and logically. I think it doesn't really work well. But so he employs all these theories to make sense of robots as non-human agents that should have rights in democracy. And I think the problematic aspect of this is, of course, the idea haunting us that if we give robots rights, they might take over societies, right? They might take over political power and rule the world. Now, I'm not sure if that's a realistic scenario, but what I think is, I think I lost my other point. So I think, yeah, the point is that we form these relationships and see them as persons. Should they have rights? Sorry, I just lost the connection of my thought here. So anyway, I think this approach also doesn't work very well, because, yeah, that was actually my point. It is threatening our societies if we see robots as equal partners, while they are, in my opinion at least, and that's a conversation to be had, are not sentient beings, right? So I suggest an alternative, a third approach, which I would call the transformational approach. And this approach pays attention to us as humans and does not try to suppress the emotional bonds that we're forming with AI, with robots, but actively engages in these relationships, but does this very critically and in a very self-reflective manner, and in a very self-exploratory manner. So it needs awareness, because I think we cannot suppress the relationships. They will happen, but we need some awareness of how they happen and where we are going. So I started thinking along these lines in The Politics of Becoming, where I looked at how our engagement with social media, with online platforms, with digital platforms, changes our identities in democratic participation, how we transform, how we self-transform, and how we, the platforms of course, also structure our engagement, our democratic engagement, and how we can gain a certain amount of human democratic agency in these processes of self-presentation online. And I want to continue this thinking in relation to AI. The ontological perspective I'm coming from is new materialist assemblage theory. So basically, that gives me a very good starting point because it says, look at materiality, right? Look at the things, look at the matter that things are made out of. And I think this is very useful when we are thinking about AI, because when we think about AI, usually we think in very abstract terms. We think it's, you know, the algorithms, they're out there, it's the internet, it's very kind of like out there in the ether. ChatGPT we don't perceive necessarily as a very material conversation partner, but as kind of like on a screen, on and off, wherever we switch it on different screens. It's very elusive. And I think focusing on materiality really helps here. So instead of thinking about AI as the previous image, I suggest thinking about AI as this image, right? To think about the hardware, to think about all the material networks the internet is made out of, to think about the data centers, right, that cause huge pollution and environmental degradation problems. So we need this materialist perspective on AI, I think, to enhance our human agency in this process, because, and I'm not approaching this in a rationalist way and say, you know, like when we study AI in a textbook manner, we will gain agency. I mean, this is an approach that can work too, but my approach, I think, is a much more experiential, and that's why the materiality helps as well, right? We need to engage with the actual physical stuff and engage with the interfaces to then understand better, but understand in an emotional way rather than understand only in a rational way. So this is the robotics lab that I'm collaborating with at the University of Canberra, and I love the mess. I love the stuff, you know, because our Center for Deliberative Democracy, we have a nice space. There are a couple of books, but that's as far as materiality goes, right? And then it's our ideas. We talk. There are chairs. We talk. That's it. But here, look at all this stuff. I love it. You know, it's such a cool workplace. So I'm working on a project proposal is under review, where I suggest to use participatory action research to develop the lived experience, explore the lived experience, and build emotional intelligence in interaction with AI. The idea is to construct your personal AI online conversation partner and engage with the conversation partner as part of participatory action research, so that your digital online partner is a co-researcher. And while you personify them and subjectivize them as a co-researcher, you engage in a relationship that you then yourself critically observe, right? So it's a playing and exercising of building relationships, but reflecting on these relationships. This is us in the robotics lab. John Dryzek, photo by Selen Ercan. Thank you very much. As we're engaging with AI, it's very awkward, like for us, right? We feel very awkward around robots. We don't know how to interact, so it's a funny experience. And there, I'm currently doing a small project at the University of Canberra. It's very small scale, but I think it's quite exciting. It's called Robots in the Room. And what we're doing is we're facilitating small scale, small group deliberations with 5 human participants and 1 robot participant. And we will have political discussions, and we'll see how the robot engages with the humans. And of course, our curiosity is how the humans will relate to the robot. And we will do interviews and surveys after the conversations. We'll have 6 small group deliberations that are facilitated by a human facilitator, and we will then explore how humans interacted and built relationships. So that's it. Thank you so much for listening. I'm very curious about your takes and ideas. Thank you.